Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. By faith, the elders obtained good report. And through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and being persuaded of them, and embracing them, and confessing that they were both strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek another country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to return. But they desired a better country. That is a heavenly one. Wherefore God was not ashamed to be called their God. And he hath prepared for them a city.
Most people in the United States have heard the story of the first Thanksgiving between Native Americans and the Pilgrims. It is celebrated in much of our advertising for the holiday. But who were these Pilgrims known as Puritans? They were Christians who believed that salvation was individual, not institutional, and that they were called to live pure and righteous lives according to the Scriptures. These were common poor people from England, and they separated themselves from both the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. King James I of England was head of the Anglican Church. He thought dissenters were a challenge to his authority. Soon the Puritans were being persecuted, along with all other separatist groups, such as the Baptists. In the midst of one night, some of the Puritans escaped to Holland, now called the Netherlands, and many others of their families joined them later. Though there was more tolerance for their faith in the Netherlands, the Puritans were still regarded as foreigners. They could only get hired for the worst low-paying jobs. They saved what little money they could and longed for another place they could call home. An opportunity came for them to travel to the New World, America. This timing was a gift of God's providence. They were able to leave the Netherlands before Catholic Spain attacked in what would come to be known as the 30 Years' War. A financial backer wanted to form a plantation colony in America. Many of the Puritans gave all they possessed in order to join the venture. But many others had to remain behind. It was a sad occasion when they had to say goodbye to their friends and family members, knowing that they would never again be together until they met in heaven. Their 2 ships sailed to England to pick up other passengers for the trip. The financial backer only wanted profit. He hired old ships that were falling apart. The Mayflower was one of the two ships. The other was called the Speedwell. The Puritans were shocked to discover that most of the other passengers were not of their faith. But there was nothing they could do about it. They were in God's hands. The first attempt to leave England failed as the Speedwell began to sink. They had to turn back, and all the passengers from the sinking ship had to join the others in the Mayflower. The Mayflower was overcrowded, lacking in sufficient supplies, and sailing in September, which was far too late in the year. They arrived at the beginning of winter and landed far north of where the colony was supposed to be planted. But this too was by God's grace. The native tribe of the place where they landed had all died from a plague 4 years prior to the Mayflower's arrival, so there were no inhabitants who would fight them for the land. Fearing that the non-Christians would abandon the colony when winter was over, all who remained signed the Mayflower Compact, agreeing to help and defend each other. This is often recognized as a precursor of documents of freedom that later established the United States. The neighboring Wampanoag tribe had also been decimated by the previous plague and were fearful of being killed by the larger Narragansett tribe. So it was to their benefit to make a peace alliance with the European settlers. But the winter was harsh.
It pleased God to visit us then with death daily, and with so general a disease that the living were scarce able to bury the dead, and the well in no measure sufficient to tend the sick.
By spring, more than half of the settlers had died from hunger, cold, and disease. Many years before the Mayflower arrived, a Wampanoag tribesman named Tisquantum had been captured by another European expedition and was taken to England. In captivity, Tisquantum, also called Squanto, learned how to speak English. He later was able to return to his tribe in America. God had provided an intermediary between the Indians and the Plymouth colony. The Wampanoag taught the Plymouth settlers how to fish, hunt, and plant crops in this strange new land. The first Thanksgiving was a 3-day celebration that actually happened by accident. The Wampanoag paid the settlers an uninvited visit. It came after harvest. Together they celebrated 1 year of survival as a colony. The Indians and the Pilgrims shared crops, berries, venison, fish, and fowl, and they played games together. It was a time of peace and gratitude. How could they give thanks when so many had died? Because without God's providential care, all of them would have died, both settlers and natives alike. The Puritans continued to worship God in years to come with a day of thanksgiving after the harvest. The first national day of Thanksgiving came during another time of great tragedy and hardship. Almost 150 years later, the American colonies fought for independence from England. But they lost all their major battles and barely clung to the hope for freedom. Yet God provided. When all seemed lost, God gave a great victory in the Battle of Saratoga at just the right time. The Continental Congress called for a national day of thanksgiving to God after the victory at Saratoga. The tide of the war now completely changed in favor of the colonies until they won their freedom. In 1863, following the Union victory at Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln called for a national day of thanksgiving. This battle, too, was a turning point for the American Civil War. Once again, the holiday was celebrated in a time of great turmoil and loss of life. Later that year, President Lincoln established our annual Thanksgiving Day to be celebrated on the fourth Thursday of the month of November. He hoped that it would eventually help reunite the fractured country. Thanksgiving Day is more than a day of feasting, family, and football games. It is a day to thank God for His provision in good times. But it also recognizes His providence and protection through troubling times of hardship and grief.